This slidecast introduces the earliest epoch of Latin American modernism in South America. Now, as we will see, this is not going to take the same trajectory that it does in Mexico. In South America, there is a much more ambiguous relation to political revolution. For example, there are many fewer institutions already set up for art and the Academy for Training Artists, for example. And in general, we're going to see a move towards a rational, often geometric sort of modernism that is associated with Europeans like Léger and Corbusier and Aux Enfants, and then later on with Russian constructivists and others. But before we get there, we're going to start with Pedro Figari, an Uruguayan painter in the early 20th century who followed at least one of modernism's most basic diktats, and that is to deal with the problem of paint, or to express oneself and be attentive to the touch and the gesture, the stroke of paint. And here we see Candombe from 1924, in which Figari is definitely working with thick impastos. He's letting it he's letting it gather up and form these sorts of topographies on the surface of the canvas. And he's definitely not concerned with chiaroscuro, or really fine distinctions of light and color, because that would get in the way of his really quite luscious, quite sensual treatment of paint. And this is seen all over the Euro-American sphere as painters disengage from the very clean, draftsmanly style that was associated with academies and with trained artists throughout the 19th century. And those of you who are more familiar with European art, think Ingres, think even Delacroix, think all of the people that are trained in European academies or in the academy in Mexico, and paint and draw in this very classicizing, very firmly seized manner. Figari is not doing that here, and this is like post-impressionism and even impressionism in Euro-American painting, or in European painting specifically. And this is something that Figari has picked up on as a major concern of modernism, and he has injected it immediately into South American painting. Now, in addition to the treatment of the paint, Figari is modern in his sense of painting modern life, painting what is around him. But in Uruguay, that is not the same as in, say, Paris of the late 19th century. Instead, Figari is mainly, although not exclusively, mainly concerned with the lives of Afro-Uruguayans around him. He realizes that this is a special aspect of Uruguay and of Brazil, and the very, very strong Afro roots of the culture of that area, including in religion, in dance, in all sorts of customs that one can see here. Candombe is a reference to the religion. He is, in fact, illustrating dance and sort of Sunday fetes that were a regular part of this culture's and Uruguayan society. Uruguay is far in the south, at the very end of the big yellow portion, which is Brazil. Here, it's a tiny country, and in many ways it has an outsized sort of influence early on, because it straddles the two major art worlds in South America, and that is Brazil to the north and Argentina to the south. And in fact, Buenos Aires, the capital of Argentina, and by far its most important cultural center, is directly across the Rio de la Plata from Uruguay. In the teens and 20s in Brazil, it's really two women who are the pillars, the monuments to modernist practice. And on your left is Anita Malfatti. The portrait that you see is very early, 1916, 1917, and it is really Malfatti who brings the arbitrary color and the flat expressive planes and the idea that one distorts for effect, really brings that to the attention of the Brazilian public, and she was roundly castigated. The critical response was extremely negative, and Malfatti never really recovered. But on your right, you see the person who was able to do a lot of the same things, the sort of monumental, simple forms, the very geometric motifs in the background, and that is Tarsila do Amaral. Tarsila do Amaral in the 20s, and this is the black woman from 1923, was able to bring a lot of the same formal qualities that Malfatti had tried earlier, but she was able to make them stick. She was able to make them a part of at least advanced Brazilian artistic discourse. And this may be because by that time in Sao Paulo, in the 5 or 6 years that had passed between Malfatti's ill-fated debut and Tarsila's, is that Sao Paulo had a week of modern art, and in 1922, and in this week, the Brazilian public was introduced to many modernist practices that had been going on in Europe for the last 10 to 15 years. Another thing that sets Tarsila do Amaral apart from Anita Malfatti is the insistence on being Brazilian. The insistence, in fact, on somehow being attentive in the work of art to being Brazilian, or creating a Brazilian iconography or a Brazilian visual culture. And the way that, of course, they thought they were going to do that is through modernist practices. In fact, the academy and all the sort of old world, old school ways of doing things is what held Brazilians back and what kept them from being Brazilian in this version of the story. Tarsila was, like Pedro Figari earlier, admitting the African roots of the South American soul. A negra, the black woman here, is definitely and Tarsila do Amaral, make no mistake, is not an Afro-Brazilian, but she is identifying with this this aspect of Brazilian culture that is felt as foundational. And so Tarsila really is in some ways a richer embodiment, or a more profound embodiment of modernism, in that she is wrestling with the identity of Brazil and its culture at the same time that she is bringing modernist practices to the center of Brazilian avant-garde art. But it's not just ethic or sort of human identity that is at stake here. It's also the modernization of what was an extremely rural and somewhat impoverished countryside. And this is Railway Station from 1924, again by Tarsila do Amaral. And we can see that the sort of bucolic Brazilian countryside is now traversed by electrical wires and railway lines. And these two things are the embodiments of modernity for many, many people, certainly technological modernity. And she is encasing this, of course, in a geometric, regular, modern skin of form, so that all of this, in fact, forms a whole that speaks to modernization in Brazilian technology and modernism in Brazilian visual culture.